A millionaire pays a homeless woman to have a child, but the baby shocks everyone. A light drizzle fell over the city as the streets buzzed with hurried footsteps and muffled conversations. The air was cold, biting at exposed skin and driving people to seek shelter. Amidst the chaos, Sarah sat on a weathered park bench, her thin coat doing little to protect her from the elements. Her hands, cracked and red from the cold, clutched a crumpled paper cup as she watched the world rush by. She had long grown used to being invisible. Her mind wandered to better times, days when life wasn't a constant battle for survival. She could almost hear the laughter of her younger self, a time when she dreamed of becoming a teacher. Those dreams now felt like a cruel joke. She shifted uncomfortably, her stomach growling in protest. It had been 2 days since her last proper meal. Across the street, Marcus Hayes stepped out of a black town car. His tailored suit fit him perfectly, exuding power and wealth. His presence commanded attention, though he moved with an air of detachment. The billionaire scanned the bustling crowd, his eyes narrowing as they landed on Sarah. His driver, a stout man in his 50s, followed his gaze. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Hayes?" the driver asked, his voice low. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he adjusted the cuff of his sleeve and said, "Wait here." He crossed the street with purposeful strides, his polished shoes clicking against the wet pavement. Sarah didn't notice him at first. Her focus was on a young couple nearby, their laughter a painful reminder of what she had lost. She flinched when a shadow fell over her. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice calm but commanding. Sarah looked up, her guard immediately rising. Years on the streets had taught her to be wary of strangers. "I don't have anything to give you," she said flatly. Marcus's lips twitched in what could have been a smile. "I'm not here to take anything from you. In fact, I'd like to offer you something." Her eyes narrowed. "What kind of offer?" "May I sit?" he asked, gesturing to the empty space on the bench. She hesitated but nodded. He lowered himself onto the bench, careful not to let his expensive suit touch the damp wood. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the city filled the silence between them. "I know this will sound unusual," Marcus began, his tone measured, "but I've been looking for someone like you." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Someone like me? What's that supposed to mean?" "A woman with resilience, strength," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Someone who understands hardship?" She laughed bitterly. "And why would a man like you care about that?" Marcus leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. "Because I have a proposition. One that could change your life." Her skepticism deepened. "I'm not interested in scams." "This isn't a scam," Marcus assured her. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to her. "My name is Marcus Hayes. I'm willing to pay you $1 million. Sarah blinked, her mind struggling to process his words. "For what?" "I want you to have my child." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Sarah stared at him, waiting for him to laugh or take it back, but his expression remained serious. "You're insane," she said, standing abruptly. "I'm not doing this." "Wait," Marcus said, his voice firm but not unkind. "At least hear me out." She hesitated, the promise of $1 million warring with her instincts. Against her better judgment, she sat back down. "Why me?" she demanded. "You could have anyone. Why pick some homeless woman off the street?" "Because I'm not looking for just anyone," Marcus said. "I want someone who understands struggle, who will value this opportunity as much as I do." "What's the catch?" she asked, crossing her arms. "There's no catch," he replied. "You'll live in my home, receive the best medical care, and after the child is born, you'll be free to go with the money. The only condition is that the child will remain with me." Sarah's mind raced. The offer was tempting, more than tempting. $1 million could change everything. But the idea of giving up a child, her child, felt impossible. "I need time to think about it," she said finally. "Take all the time you need," Marcus said, standing. "But know that this offer won't last forever." He handed her an envelope. "Inside is my contact information and an initial advance. Consider it a gesture of goodwill." She opened the envelope and gasped. Inside was $10,000 in crisp bills. Marcus walked away, leaving Sarah to grapple with the enormity of his proposal. She clutched the envelope tightly, the weight of his offer settling heavily on her shoulders. That night, Sarah sat in the shelter, the envelope hidden beneath her makeshift pillow. She replayed the conversation in her mind, torn between the opportunity to escape her circumstances and the moral dilemma of giving up a child. Sleep eluded her, and by morning, her decision was made. She called the number on the card, her voice trembling. "I'll do it." Marcus's voice was calm but tinged with satisfaction on the other end of the line. "You've made the right decision, Sarah. I'll have my driver pick you up tomorrow morning." The call ended abruptly, leaving Sarah staring at the phone in her hand. The weight of her decision pressed on her chest, but she couldn't deny the flicker of hope it brought. For the first time in years, she could see a way out of the relentless cycle of despair. That night, she packed what little she owned into a battered backpack, her thoughts oscillating between nervous anticipation and quiet dread. The next morning, a sleek black car pulled up outside the shelter. The driver, the same man Sarah had seen with Marcus, stepped out and opened the door for her. "Miss, if you'll follow me." Sarah hesitated, clutching her backpack tightly. The stares of the other shelter residents bore into her back, some curious, others skeptical. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped into the car. The plush leather seats and faint scent of lavender were a stark contrast to the grimy streets she had grown accustomed to. The drive was silent, save for the soft hum of the engine. As the cityscape gave way to the sprawling countryside, Sarah felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. When the car finally pulled into the circular driveway of a massive estate, her breath caught in her throat. The mansion was larger than anything she had ever imagined, its pristine white facade gleaming in the morning sun. Marcus was waiting for her at the entrance, dressed in a casual sweater and slacks that somehow still exuded wealth. He greeted her with a small, polite smile. "Welcome, Sarah. I hope your journey was comfortable." She stepped out of the car, her eyes wide as she took in her surroundings. "This place, it's like something out of a movie." Marcus's smile widened slightly. "It's been home for a long time. Come inside, we have much to discuss." Inside, the mansion was even more breathtaking. Marble floors, chandeliers, and priceless artwork adorned every corner. Sarah felt out of place, her worn clothes and backpack a glaring contrast to the opulence around her. Marcus led her to a cozy sitting room, where a fire crackled in the hearth. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to a plush armchair. "Would you like something to drink? Coffee?" "Just water," Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. A housekeeper appeared almost instantly, setting a crystal glass of water on the table in front of her. Sarah glanced around, feeling like an outsider in a world she didn't belong to. Marcus sat across from her, his expression serious. "I want to make sure you're comfortable with everything. If you have any questions, now is the time to ask." Sarah hesitated, the enormity of the situation weighing on her. "Why me?" she asked again. "You could have picked anyone. Someone with a stable life, someone better." Marcus leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I didn't want someone with a perfect life. I wanted someone who understands hardship, someone who knows what it means to fight for survival. That kind of strength, it's something money can't buy." She studied him, searching for any hint of deceit, but his expression was unreadable. "And after the baby is born? What happens to me?" "You'll receive the full payment and be free to live your life as you choose," Marcus said. "But the child will remain here with me." "That was the agreement." Sarah nodded slowly. "I just want one thing. I want the child to know who I am. I don't want to be erased." Marcus considered her words for a moment before nodding. "That's fair. You have my word." Over the next few weeks, Sarah settled into her new life at the mansion. She underwent a series of medical evaluations, meeting with top doctors and specialists. The staff was polite but distant, treating her more like an asset than a person. Marcus, however, was different. He made an effort to engage her in conversation, asking about her life and listening intently to her stories. At first, Sarah was guarded, unsure of his intentions. But as time went on, she found herself opening up. She told him about her childhood, her dreams of becoming a teacher, and the series of misfortunes that had led her to the streets. Marcus, in turn, shared snippets of his own life, his rise to wealth, the loss of his wife and child, and the emptiness that had consumed him since. One evening, as they sat in the library, Marcus handed her a book. "You mentioned you loved reading when you were younger," he said. "I thought you might like this." Sarah took the book, running her fingers over the leather cover. It was a collection of classic literature, something she had once dreamed of owning. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's the least I can do," Marcus replied. "You're giving me something I thought I'd never have again." As the weeks turned into months, Sarah's pregnancy progressed smoothly. The mansion's staff ensured she had everything she needed, from nutritious meals to prenatal yoga classes. But there were moments when Sarah felt a strange unease. During one of her routine checkups, the doctor frowned slightly as he examined the ultrasound. "Is something wrong?" Sarah asked, her heart racing. The doctor quickly composed himself. "No, nothing to worry about. It's just unusual activity. Likely nothing significant." But the words lingered in Sarah's mind. That night, she dreamt of the baby, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light as it reached out to her. She woke up in a cold sweat, her hands trembling. The dreams became more frequent as her due date approached. In them, the baby spoke to her, its voice calm and wise beyond its years. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was happening, something she couldn't yet understand. Marcus noticed her growing unease and tried to reassure her. "You're doing great, Sarah. Everything is going to be fine." But she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that their lives were about to change in ways neither of them could predict. As Sarah's due date approached, the atmosphere in the mansion grew heavier. The staff whispered in hushed tones, and Marcus seemed more withdrawn, often disappearing into his study for hours. Sarah couldn't shake the dreams that had been haunting her nights. The baby's voice, the inexplicable glow in its eyes, the overwhelming sense that this was no ordinary child. One evening, as she sat by the large window in her room, watching the rain streak down the glass, Marcus knocked softly and entered. He carried a tray with tea and biscuits, an unusual gesture for a man who usually left such tasks to his staff. "I thought you might like some company," he said, placing the tray on the table. Sarah smiled faintly, her hands instinctively resting on her swollen belly. "Thanks. I could use a distraction." Marcus sat across from her, his gaze falling to her stomach. "How are you feeling?" "Anxious," she admitted. "I keep thinking about what's next." Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been meaning to talk to you about that. I know this hasn't been easy for you, and I want you to know that I'm grateful." Sarah studied him, sensing a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "Why do I feel like there's more to this than you're telling me?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Because there is." Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Marcus leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "This child, it's not just about me wanting to be a father again. There's something unique about you, Sarah." Her pulse quickened. "What are you talking about?" "When I first found you," Marcus began, choosing his words carefully, "it wasn't by chance. I'd been searching for someone with a specific genetic marker, something incredibly rare. You're one of the few people in the world who has it." Sarah stared at him, her mind racing. "Genetic marker? For what?" "For something my late wife was working on," Marcus said, his voice tinged with both pride and sorrow. "She was a geneticist, studying ways to enhance human capabilities. Before she died, she made a breakthrough, something that could change the world. But the research was never completed. And you thought I could, what? Be part of some experiment." Sarah's voice rose, her emotions spilling over. "It's not like that," Marcus said quickly. "This child is natural, there's no tampering. But your genetic makeup, it makes this baby special. Extraordinary." Sarah stood abruptly, her hands trembling. "You used me. All this time, you pretended to care, but I was just some lab project to you." "Sarah, please," Marcus pleaded. "I didn't know what to expect when I started this, but I've come to care about you. And this child, it's not an experiment. It's a miracle." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I trusted you, Marcus. I thought this was about giving you a family, but it's about your obsession. Before he could respond, Sarah turned and walked out of the room, her mind a whirlwind of anger and betrayal. She retreated to her room, slamming the door behind her and sinking onto the bed. The baby kicked, a strong, deliberate movement that startled her. "Is that you?" she whispered, her hand pressing against her belly. Another kick followed, almost as if in response. For the first time, Sarah felt a deep, unshakable connection to the life growing inside her. Whatever Marcus's intentions had been, this child was hers, and she would do everything in her power to protect it. The next morning, Sarah avoided Marcus, spending most of her time in the garden. She needed space to think, to figure out what to do. But as the day wore on, the familiar tightening in her abdomen became more frequent and intense. By evening it was clear, she was in labor. "Marcus," she screamed, clutching the edge of a table as a wave of pain rippled through her body. He burst into the room, his face pale. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "It's time," she gasped, her breaths coming in short, panicked bursts. Marcus didn't hesitate. He called the staff, who sprang into action, and within minutes, they were rushing Sarah to the hospital. The car ride was a blur of contractions and soothing words from Marcus, though Sarah could barely focus on anything beyond the pain. When they arrived, a team of doctors and nurses was already waiting, thanks to Marcus's preparations. Sarah was wheeled into the delivery room, her vision swimming as the fluorescent lights overhead blurred together. "Breathe, Sarah," one of the nurses coached. "You're doing great." Hours passed in a haze of pain and determination. Marcus paced outside the room, his fists clenched as he listened to Sarah's cries. Finally, the sound of a baby's wail broke through the tension. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, holding up the squirming newborn. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she reached for her daughter, her heart swelling with an indescribable mix of love and relief. But as the nurse placed the baby in her arms, a hush fell over the room. The child's eyes, wide and curious, shimmered with an otherworldly glow that seemed to pulse faintly. The medical staff exchanged nervous glances, and even Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What's happening?" she whispered, clutching her baby tightly. The doctor cleared his throat, trying to maintain his composure. "We'll need to run some tests." Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression a mix of awe and fear. He stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the baby's luminous eyes. "She's perfect," he said softly, but his tone betrayed his uncertainty. Sarah pulled her daughter closer, her protective instincts surging. "No, Tess. She's fine." The doctor hesitated but nodded. "As you wish." That night, as Sarah lay in the hospital bed with her baby in her arms, she couldn't stop staring at her. The glow in her eyes had dimmed, but the memory of it lingered. What did it mean? Was this what Marcus had been searching for? And most importantly, what did it mean for her daughter's future? The next morning, sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, casting a soft glow over Sarah and her newborn daughter. The baby, wrapped snugly in a pink blanket, stirred lightly in her arms. Sarah watched her, marveling at the tiny fingers curling and uncurling as though grasping for something unseen. She had never felt a love so immediate and powerful. But beneath the wonder was a deep unease. The events of the previous night, the baby's glowing eyes, the hushed whispers of the medical staff, and Marcus's reaction, played over and over in her mind. She could feel a storm brewing, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. The door creaked open, and Marcus stepped in, his face etched with concern. He carried a bouquet of pale pink roses, which he placed on the bedside table. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She adjusted the baby in her arms and looked up at him, her eyes hard. "What's going on, Marcus? Don't tell me last night was normal." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Sarah, I don't have all the answers. But I do know this child is remarkable." "Remarkable?" Sarah repeated, her voice rising. "She's a baby, Marcus. My baby. She's not some experiment." Marcus sat down in the chair beside the bed, leaning forward with his hands clasped. "I understand why you're upset. I do. But you saw what I saw. Those eyes, it's not normal." "Maybe it's nothing," Sarah shot back, though even she didn't fully believe it. "Babies are born with all kinds of things that doctors can't explain. Marcus hesitated. And maybe it's something extraordinary. I've already reached out to a specialist. Specialist? Sarah interrupted, her tone sharp. No, absolutely not. She's not a specimen for you to study. Sarah, listen to me, Marcus pleaded. This isn't just about curiosity. If there's something unique about her, something that could help humanity. She's a baby, Sarah snapped, cutting him off again. She doesn't owe humanity anything. She's my child, Marcus. And I won't let you take that from her. The baby stirred, letting out a soft whimper. Sarah immediately softened, rocking her gently and murmuring soothing words. Marcus watched her, his expression conflicted. I'm not trying to take her from you, he said after a long pause. But I can't ignore what's happening. If we don't understand it, how can we protect her? Sarah glanced down at her daughter, the glow in her eyes from the previous night now completely gone. She looked like any other baby, beautiful, fragile, innocent. But Sarah couldn't deny the gnawing fear that Marcus might be right. What if there was more to this than she could see? Fine, she said finally, her voice tight. But any tests or specialists happen on my terms. She's staying with me, and no one does anything without my consent. Do you understand? Marcus nodded, relieved to have her agreement, even if it was conditional. Of course. Your terms? A week later, Sarah and the baby, now named Lily, returned to the mansion. The once opulent space now felt suffocating to Sarah, every corner a reminder of Marcus's hidden motives. Despite her misgivings, she couldn't deny the comfort and safety it provided for Lily. Marcus kept his distance in the days that followed, respecting Sarah's boundaries but still coordinating with the specialists he had contacted. Meanwhile, Sarah threw herself into motherhood, reveling in the small joys of caring for Lily, her tiny smiles, the way she grasped Sarah's finger, the soft coos that filled the quiet moments. But it wasn't long before the unusual began to resurface. One evening, as Sarah was putting Lily to bed, she noticed something strange. The baby, who had been fussing moments earlier, suddenly stopped crying. Her tiny body relaxed, and her eyes, still wide and innocent, seemed to fix on a spot in the room. "What is it, sweetheart?" Sarah murmured, glancing in the direction Lily was looking. There was nothing there, just the shadows cast by the dim light on the walls. But Lily's gaze remained unwavering, her tiny mouth forming a soft O, as though she was marveling at something only she could see. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She reached out, gently turning Lily's face back toward her. "It's okay, baby. Mama's here." Lily blinked, her focus shifting back to Sarah. But the moment lingered in Sarah's mind, a thread of unease weaving through her thoughts. The following days brought more inexplicable moments. Once, Sarah walked into Lily's room to find her giggling at the air, her hands reaching out as though playing with an invisible companion. Another time, she swore she heard Lily mimic the tone of her voice when she sang a lullaby, far too advanced for a baby her age. When Sarah mentioned these incidents to Marcus, he didn't seem surprised. "I've been reading about cases like this," he said, his tone measured. "Children with heightened awareness or abilities. Sometimes it starts early." "She's just a baby," Sarah insisted. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that Lily was different. Special. One night, Sarah woke abruptly, a strange sensation pulling her from sleep. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding as she listened for any sounds from Lily's room. Everything was quiet, but the feeling persisted, a sense that something wasn't right. She hurried down the hall, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floor. When she reached Lily's room, she pushed the door open carefully, her breath catching as she stepped inside. Lily was awake, her tiny body bathed in the soft glow of the nightlight. But it wasn't the light that caught Sarah's attention, it was Lily herself. Her eyes, once again shimmering faintly, seemed to illuminate the room. The glow wasn't bright, but it was unmistakable. Sarah's throat tightened. "Lily," she whispered, moving to the crib. "What's happening, baby?" Lily blinked up at her, the glow dimming as quickly as it had appeared. She reached out, her tiny fingers brushing against Sarah's hand. The contact sent a warmth flooding through Sarah, a feeling of calm and reassurance that defied explanation. For a moment, Sarah simply stared at her daughter, the questions swirling in her mind too overwhelming to voice. What was Lily trying to tell her? And how much longer could she keep this a secret from the world? The next morning, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about what she had seen. She held Lily close as the baby cooed and gurgled in her arms, but the questions were relentless. The glowing eyes, the strange sense of calm that had washed over her, it was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Marcus noticed the dark circles under her eyes when she entered the dining room. He put down his coffee cup, his expression one of quiet concern. "You look like you didn't sleep." Sarah avoided his gaze. "Lily was awake a lot last night." Marcus set the cup down and leaned forward slightly. "Did something happen?" She hesitated, torn between keeping the incident to herself and sharing it with him. After a long pause, she sighed. Her eyes, they glowed again. Marcus didn't look shocked, which only made her more uneasy. "This is exactly why we need to understand what's happening, Sarah. It's not normal." "Normal or not, she's still just a baby," Sarah replied, her voice firm. "And I don't want her being treated like some kind of science project." "She's not a project," Marcus said, his tone softening. "But if there's something special about her, something that could help us understand the world, don't we have a responsibility to explore that?" Sarah stood abruptly, holding Lily tighter. "My responsibility is to her, Marcus. Not to your curiosity or anyone else's." She left the room without another word, her emotions boiling over. She couldn't deny that she was scared of what Lily's abilities meant and scared of what Marcus might do if he thought the child's potential was more important than her humanity. Days turned into weeks, and Lily's development only heightened Sarah's anxiety. By the time Lily was 4 months old, it was clear that she was unlike any other child. She began crawling far earlier than expected, her movements precise and purposeful. Her gaze seemed to hold an uncanny awareness, as though she understood more than a baby ever should. Then there were the moments Sarah couldn't explain. One afternoon, as she folded laundry in the nursery, Lily began to cry. The sound pierced through the quiet room, sharp and insistent. Sarah turned, her heart breaking at the sight of her daughter's tear-streaked face. "It's okay, sweetheart," she murmured, hurrying to pick her up. But as she reached for Lily, something extraordinary happened. The mobile hanging above the crib began to spin, not gently, but with a deliberate force. Sarah froze, her eyes widening as the mobile turned faster and faster, the soft tinkling sound of the hanging charms filling the air. And then it stopped. Lily's cries faded immediately, replaced by a contented coo. She reached for the mobile with her tiny hands, her expression one of calm fascination. Sarah's knees felt weak as she lowered herself into the rocking chair, clutching Lily tightly. "What are you trying to tell me, baby?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What's going on with you?" That night, Sarah found Marcus in his study, surrounded by stacks of books and papers. He looked up when she entered, his face lighting with cautious hope. "I need answers," Sarah said, closing the door behind her. "No more vague explanations, no more promises." "What is happening to my daughter?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression turning serious. "I've been doing some research," he admitted. "And I've spoken to a few experts." Sarah's stomach clenched. "What kind of experts?" "Geneticists, neurologists," he said. "People who specialize in unique cases like this. They believe Lily's abilities might be linked to your genetic marker, the one I mentioned before." "And what does that mean?" Sarah asked, her voice rising. "What do they want to do with her?" "Nothing invasive," Marcus assured her. "They just want to observe her development, maybe run a few non-invasive tests." "Sarah, this could be groundbreaking." "She's not a science experiment," Sarah snapped. "She's a child." "My child." Marcus stood, his voice calm but firm. "I know that, Sarah. But if we don't understand what's happening to her, how can we protect her? How can we keep her safe from people who might want to exploit her?" Sarah's resolve wavered. She hated that he was making sense. The world was full of people who would see Lily as an opportunity, not a person. But handing her over to strangers, even for observation, felt like a betrayal. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But if I feel like this is putting her at risk, it stops. Do you hear me?" Marcus nodded. Loud and clear. The next week, 2 specialists arrived at the mansion, a husband and wife team named Dr. Patel and Dr. Monroe. Both were warm and personable, their excitement tempered by a clear respect for Sarah's boundaries. "We're here to observe and provide insight," Dr. Patel explained as they set up equipment in a makeshift lab in the library. Nothing more. Sarah stayed close to Lily throughout the process, her watchful eyes never leaving the specialists as they worked. They conducted simple tests, noting Lily's advanced motor skills and uncanny ability to track movement. But it was during one particular test that Sarah's unease deepened. Dr. Monroe held up a colorful toy, moving it slowly from side to side. Lily watched intently, her gaze following the toy with precision. And then, to everyone's astonishment, the toy began to move on its own, floating gently out of Dr. Monroe's hand and hovering in midair. The room fell silent. Dr. Patel's voice was hushed when he finally spoke. This is extraordinary." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She rushed forward, scooping Lily into her arms as the toy clattered to the floor. "That's enough," she said, her voice shaking. "We're done for today." The specialists exchanged glances but didn't argue. Sarah left the room, her heart pounding as she cradled Lily against her chest. The baby's eyes met hers, calm and unbothered, as if she had no idea what she had just done. But Sarah knew. And she was terrified of what it meant. Sarah paced the nursery that evening, holding Lily close as the baby drifted to sleep. Her mind was a storm of questions and fears. The image of the floating toy replayed in her mind like a loop she couldn't escape. What was happening to her daughter? How could she protect her from a world that might never understand, or worse, exploit her? The door creaked open softly, and Marcus stepped inside. He paused, taking in the sight of Sarah cradling Lily, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of the nightlight. "I know you're scared," Marcus began, his voice quiet. "But you saw what she did. We can't ignore this." Sarah shot him a sharp look. "You think I don't know that? She's my child, Marcus. I've seen every moment of this, every strange, unexplainable thing. But what do you expect me to do? Hand her over to scientists?" "No," Marcus said firmly, stepping closer. "That's not what I'm suggesting. But we need to understand her abilities if we're going to keep her safe. People are going to notice sooner or later, Sarah. We have to be ready." Sarah sat down in the rocking chair, exhaustion washing over her. "I just want her to have a normal life." "Is that too much to ask?" Marcus crouched beside her, his expression softening. "I want that for her too. But maybe her normal isn't like everyone else's. Maybe it's something more." The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sarah didn't respond, her gaze fixed on Lily's peaceful face. Marcus straightened, sensing that she needed space. "I'll be downstairs if you need me." After he left, Sarah leaned her head back and closed her eyes. The weight of her responsibility was suffocating, but she couldn't let herself falter. Lily needed her to be strong, to figure out how to navigate a future that seemed more uncertain with each passing day. The next morning, Sarah decided to take a walk with Lily around the mansion grounds. The fresh air helped clear her head, even if only slightly. She carried Lily in a soft sling, the baby nestled against her chest, her tiny hand clutching at Sarah's shirt. The sprawling estate was eerily quiet, the towering trees and manicured gardens offering a sense of isolation that Sarah both appreciated and resented. As she walked, she noticed a gardener working near the edge of the property. He glanced up and gave her a polite nod, but something about the way his eyes lingered on Lily made Sarah uneasy. She quickened her pace, heading toward the small pond at the center of the estate. Sitting on a stone bench, she let out a shaky breath. The world felt too big, too dangerous, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Lily stirred, her wide eyes blinking up at Sarah. For a moment, they seemed to shimmer faintly, the light catching them in a way that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "What are we going to do, little one?" she whispered, brushing her fingers gently over Lily's cheek. "How do I keep you safe?" The baby cooed softly, her tiny hand reaching up to touch Sarah's face. The warmth of her touch eased some of Sarah's fear, but it didn't erase the growing sense of urgency. Later that day, Marcus called Sarah into his study. She hesitated before entering, her guard already up. Inside, she found him sitting at his desk, papers and files spread out before him. A man and woman stood nearby, both dressed sharply and exuding an air of authority. "Sarah," Marcus said, standing as she entered. "These are security consultants I've hired, Mr. Bennett and Ms. Reeves. They're here to help ensure Lily's safety." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Security? Why?" Marcus exchanged a glance with the consultants before speaking. "Because word is going to get out, Sarah. We can't keep this contained forever. People will ask questions. And when they do, I want to make sure no one can get near her without our permission. I don't want her living in a fortress," Sarah said, her voice firm. "It's not about turning this place into a fortress," Marcus replied. "It's about being prepared. These people are the best at what they do. They'll make sure no one can touch her." Ms. Reeves stepped forward, her tone professional but kind. "Ms. Walker, I understand this is overwhelming. But Mr. Hayes is right. People talk, and information spreads fast. It's better to be proactive." Sarah crossed her arms, her protective instincts flaring. "I'll agree to this on one condition: Lily's life doesn't change. No armed guards following her everywhere, no constant surveillance. She's a baby, not a prisoner." Mr. Bennett nodded. "Understood. We'll keep everything discreet." Reluctantly, Sarah agreed, but the presence of the consultants only heightened her unease. Every step forward seemed to remind her of how far her life, and Lily's, had spiraled from anything resembling normalcy. The weeks that followed brought a mix of calm and tension. The consultants implemented subtle security measures around the estate, and Marcus continued his research, often disappearing into his study for hours at a time. Sarah tried to focus on Lily, cherishing the quiet moments they shared, but the weight of the unknown loomed over her like a shadow. One afternoon, Sarah decided to visit the library, hoping to find something to distract her racing mind. As she browsed the shelves, Lily dozed in her sling, her tiny breaths soft and rhythmic. Sarah's fingers brushed against the spine of a book on mythology, and on a whim, she pulled it down. She flipped through the pages, her eyes skimming over tales of gods and heroes, of beings with powers beyond human comprehension. One passage caught her attention, its words resonating in a way that sent a chill down her spine. "In every age, there are those born with gifts that defy explanation. They walk among us, carrying the potential for greatness or destruction. It is not their power that defines them, but the choices they make and the people who guide them." Sarah closed the book, her hands trembling. The words felt like a warning and a responsibility. Just then, Lily stirred, her tiny fingers brushing against the book. Sarah looked down at her daughter, her heart aching with love and fear. "No matter what happens," she whispered, "I'll always be here for you." Lily's eyes opened, and for a brief moment, they shimmered with that unearthly glow. Sarah didn't flinch this time. She met her daughter's gaze, a quiet determination settling over her. Whatever was coming, she would face it. For Lily's sake. The days that followed were quiet on the surface, but Sarah could feel the tension simmering just beneath. The security measures Marcus had implemented seemed invisible at first, discreet cameras tucked into corners, a subtle increase in the presence of staff patrolling the grounds, but she couldn't ignore the growing sense of being watched. Sarah focused on Lily, who was now 5 months old and developing faster than anyone could have imagined. Her motor skills were uncanny, her focus unshakable, and the moments of glowing eyes or unexplainable events were becoming more frequent. Sarah hadn't told Marcus about the most recent incidents, fearing that he would take it as a reason to push for more tests. One evening, Sarah sat with Lily in the nursery, the baby propped up on a soft pillow as Sarah played with a set of wooden blocks. Lily reached for them with surprising precision, her tiny hands stacking them in a way that seemed too coordinated for her age. Sarah laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're going to give those baby development books a heart attack, you know that?" she teased. Lily gurgled in response, her eyes bright and alert. But then, as Sarah reached for another block, she felt the air in the room shift. It was subtle, a faint hum, like electricity buzzing in the walls. She looked around, her heart beginning to race. "Lily," she whispered. The baby's gaze was fixed on the blocks. Without warning, one of them lifted into the air, spinning slowly. Sarah froze, her breath caught in her throat. Lily's tiny hand stretched toward the block, as if guiding it, and it floated gently to the top of the stack before settling down. The room fell silent. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for her daughter, pulling her close. Lily, what's happening to you? The baby cooed softly, resting her head against Sarah's shoulder as if nothing unusual had happened. But Sarah's mind was racing. She couldn't keep this to herself any longer. Marcus needed to know. Later that night, Sarah found Marcus in the study as usual, poring over papers and books. She hesitated in the doorway, clutching Lily tightly. The glow of the desk lamp cast long shadows across the room, making Marcus look older, more weary. "I need to talk to you," Sarah said, stepping inside. Marcus looked up, his brow furrowing. He gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing. "What is it?" he asked. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice. It happened again. But this time, it was more than her eyes. She moved something, Marcus. A block. It floated. Marcus stood, his expression shifting from concern to a strange mix of awe and fear. "Are you sure?" "I saw it with my own eyes," Sarah said. She didn't just knock it over or push it. She moved it like it was nothing. Marcus rubbed his temples, pacing the room. "This changes everything." "Don't you dare," Sarah snapped, her voice sharp. "She's still just a baby. I don't care what's happening, she's my daughter first. I won't let you turn her into some experiment." Marcus stopped pacing and faced her. "Sarah, I'm not trying to exploit her. But we can't pretend this isn't happening. If we don't understand her abilities, how do we keep her safe?" Sarah shook her head, her grip on Lily tightening. "Safe from what? From who? The world doesn't even know about her." "Yet," Marcus said, his tone grim. "But they will. People talk. And when they do, there will be those who want to control her, to use her. We have to be ready." "And what does ready mean?" Sarah demanded. "More tests? More strangers in this house? How far are you willing to go, Marcus?" Marcus's shoulders sagged, his resolve faltering. "I don't have all the answers, Sarah. But I know we can't ignore this. Please, let me help." Sarah hesitated, torn between her instincts to protect Lily at all costs and the growing realization that Marcus might be right. Finally, she nodded, though her expression remained guarded. "Fine. But we do this on my terms. No one touches her without my permission. No invasive tests. And if I think for a second that this is putting her at risk, we stop. Agreed?" Marcus nodded. "Agreed." The next day, Marcus arranged for a private meeting with Dr. Patel and Dr. Monroe. The specialists arrived with their equipment, but this time, they were accompanied by someone new, a man in his late 50s with an air of quiet authority. Marcus introduced him as Dr. Everett, a renowned expert in neurological phenomena. Sarah sat in the nursery with Lily as the specialists set up their instruments. Dr. Everett approached cautiously, his demeanor gentle and respectful. "Ms. Walker," he said, his voice calm, "I want you to know that I'm here to observe and advise. Nothing more." Sarah nodded stiffly. "Just remember, she's a baby, not a lab subject." "Understood," Dr. Everett said. The tests began with simple observations. The doctors tracked Lily's reactions to light, sound, and movement, noting her heightened awareness and advanced motor skills. But it wasn't until Dr. Everett brought out a small, glowing sphere that things took an unexpected turn. The sphere emitted a soft, pulsing light as Dr. Everett placed it on the floor in front of Lily. The baby's eyes lit up with fascination, and she reached for it eagerly. As her tiny fingers brushed against the surface, the light grew brighter, pulsing in time with her movements. "Remarkable," Dr. Everett murmured, taking notes. "It's responding to her." Sarah tensed. "What do you mean?" "This device is designed to detect bioelectric fields," he explained. "It's reacting to hers, amplifying it, even." Before Sarah could respond, the sphere lifted off the ground, hovering inches above Lily's hand. The baby giggled, delighted, as the sphere floated gently around her. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the sphere and Lily's laughter. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she watched, torn between awe and fear. "She's controlling it," Dr. Monroe whispered. "It's incredible." Sarah stood abruptly, scooping Lily into her arms. The sphere dropped to the floor with a dull thud, its light fading. "That's enough," she said, her voice shaking. "We're done for today." The specialist didn't argue, sensing the tension in her tone. Marcus approached her cautiously. "Sarah?" "No," she said firmly, cutting him off. "I let you do this, and now I'm done. She's my daughter, Marcus. Not yours. Not theirs." Without another word, she left the room, holding Lily tightly as if shielding her from the world. Sarah stormed down the hallway, her breath shaky as she held Lily close. The weight of everything, the glowing eyes, the floating objects, and now the sphere reacting to Lily's presence, pressed on her chest like a heavy stone. Once she reached the nursery, she locked the door and sank to the floor, cradling Lily tightly. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I should have stopped this sooner. I just wanted to understand, but they're going too far." Lily stirred, her tiny hand brushing against Sarah's cheek as if trying to comfort her. Sarah's tears slowed as she looked into her daughter's bright, curious eyes. The warmth in Lily's touch filled her with a fleeting sense of calm, but it wasn't enough to quiet the storm raging in her heart. That night, Sarah barely slept. Every sound, every shadow in the mansion seemed magnified, her paranoia spiraling. She felt the walls closing in, the weight of Marcus's influence looming larger than ever. She couldn't let Lily grow up like this, under constant scrutiny and fear. Something had to change. The next morning, Marcus knocked softly on the nursery door. Sarah didn't respond at first, but when he knocked again, she sighed and opened it just enough to face him. "We need to talk," he said gently. Sarah's eyes were red from crying, her expression weary. "I don't think we have anything left to say." "Please, Sarah," Marcus said, his voice sincere. "Just hear me out." She hesitated before stepping aside, allowing him to enter. Marcus glanced at Lily, who was lying in her crib, gurgling happily as she played with a stuffed animal. "I know yesterday was overwhelming," Marcus began, keeping his tone calm. "I didn't mean for things to go that far." Sarah crossed her arms, her gaze hard. "You didn't mean for it to go that far? Marcus, they're treating her like some kind of phenomenon, and you're letting them." "She's a baby." "I know," Marcus said. "And you're right. I pushed too hard too fast. But you have to understand, what's happening with Lily is extraordinary. If we don't take the time to figure this out, we're leaving her vulnerable." "She's already vulnerable," Sarah shot back. "You think those people you brought in are the only ones who'd be interested in her? What happens when the wrong people find out? What happens when they come for her?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "That's why I'm doing this, to make sure we're prepared." Sarah shook her head, her voice trembling. "Prepared for what? To turn her into a test subject? To make her live her life behind locked doors? That's not a childhood, Marcus. That's a prison." Marcus took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping. "I don't want that for her, Sarah. I want her to have a normal life. But she's not normal. We can't pretend she is." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was Lily's soft cooing as she reached for her stuffed animal. Finally, Sarah's voice broke the silence. "I need time," she said quietly. "I need to figure out what's best for her. And I can't do that here." Marcus's eyes widened slightly. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we're leaving," Sarah replied. "Lily and I. We need space away from all of this." "Away from you." Marcus looked as though she had struck him. "Sarah, you can't?" "I can," she interrupted. "And I will. I don't trust you anymore, Marcus. You say you want what's best for Lily, but I don't think you even know what that means." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, his expression a mix of frustration and desperation. "If you leave, I can't protect you. You'll be out there on your own, with no one to help if something goes wrong." "I've been on my own before," Sarah said, her voice steady. "And I'll do it again if it means keeping Lily safe." By the next evening, Sarah had packed her few belongings and prepared to leave. Marcus tried to convince her to stay, offering to scale back the testing and give her more control, but her mind was made up. She couldn't shake the feeling that as long as they stayed, Lily would never be free. As Sarah stood at the front door, holding Lily close, Marcus watched her with a pained expression. "You don't have to do this," he said one last time. "I do," Sarah replied, her voice firm. "Goodbye, Marcus." She stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against her face as she walked toward the waiting car. Marcus had insisted on providing a driver to take them wherever they wanted to go, a small concession she had reluctantly accepted. The car pulled away from the mansion, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Sarah glanced at Lily, who was fast asleep in her arms, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. They were free. But freedom came with its own challenges. Over the next few weeks, Sarah struggled to find stability. She stayed in small, nondescript hotels, never staying in one place for too long. Every time she saw a stranger glance at Lily for a moment too long, her heart raced. She avoided doctors and daycares, afraid that any attention could lead back to Marcus, or worse, someone else. Lily continued to grow and develop in ways that defied explanation. At 6 months, she was crawling with ease, her movements far more coordinated than they should have been. She began to babble in a way that almost sounded like words, her bright eyes full of intelligence and curiosity. One afternoon, as Sarah sat on the floor of their latest hotel room, playing with Lily, she noticed something strange. The baby was stacking blocks again, just as she had before. But this time, when one of the blocks toppled over, it didn't fall to the ground. It hovered in midair for a moment before gently settling back into place. Sarah froze, her heart pounding. "Lily." The baby looked up at her and smiled, as if proud of her accomplishment. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She knew she couldn't run from this anymore. Lily's abilities were growing stronger, and the world would notice sooner or later. That night, as Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, she made a decision. She couldn't protect Lily on her own. Not forever. She needed help, but not from Marcus and not from the scientists he had brought in. She needed someone who would put Lily's safety and well-being above all else. But where could she go? Who could she trust?